Welcome to the Book Podcast, where we discuss books about the book, the Bible, with your hosts, Scott Moffat and Gabriel Penfield.
We go as deep as we can go, look as hard as we can look, but we only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book. We only scratch the surface of the meaning of the book.
Have you been told the Bible is a book of myths and oral stories that have been handed down, which are great fun to read, but just really aren't true? The truth be told, most folks can't even pronounce many of the names that are found in the scriptures. By count, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,400 different characters in the pages of the Bible. The question is, how do we know if these funny sounding named people actually existed and lived? How do we know that for sure? Well, our guest author and friend of the podcast has compiled a list of 130 of those named characters in the Old and the New Testament, which are attested to in the archaeological record. By the way, Titus, our author of the day, I really liked the motorcycle you were on the back flap of your first book. How come you didn't put that on the new book? It's such an awesome book. Awesome picture.
Yeah, great picture, great motorcycle.
Do you still have the bike?
That was a publisher's choice. No, it was never my bike. It was a bike that we were using for a project.
Okay. Well, I wish you had the bike. Dr. Tutus Kennedy joins us today, and we welcome you once again. Welcome, Titus.
Thank you.
Titus is an archaeologist who has taken part in 18 digs in 6 different countries. He has a PhD from the University of South Africa, a master's degree from the University of Toronto, and a BA from Biola. Titus has studied many, if not all, of the great artifacts in the museums and the collections around the world. Titus is a research fellow at Discovery Institute and an instructor at many universities and seminaries, including my alma mater, Dallas Theological Seminary. He is the author of numerous articles as well as the author of 4 books. Titus has appeared in many documentaries that you might have seen. Titus is an all-around great guy and a new father, and we're overjoyed to have him with us today. I am Scott Moffat, your host, alongside my grandson, Gabriel Penfield, who is a field director of the Friends of Israel in Dallas, as well as a student at Dallas Theological Seminary. Now, if you're in need of someone to come to speak at your church about anything about Israel or about the Jewish folks, Gabe is the man for you to call, or you can just drop a note on our website. Now, if your comments are not all we would like, I should say that. We would like you to like and subscribe to our videos as well. Tutus Kennedy's new book is Archaeology and the People of the Bible. Now, if you read the underlining here, exploring the evidence for the historical existence of biblical characters. We examine this book today in the hopes of you buying his book. We're hoping to whet your appetite to purchase it. You can get it at Harvest House's website, or you can purchase it at Amazon. Let me begin. First, thank you again, Titus, for showing up, for being here, being available. Now, let me ask you, why did you write this book on biblical figures in the archaeological record? Why at this time? And is this a companion book to Unearthing the Bible?
Well, it's not really a companion book to any of the books, but it does explore biblical archaeology from a slightly different perspective. So one book focused on artifacts, another book focused on locations, and then a book on Jesus and the Gospels, and then this book on people. But the reason I went for this theme or this topic is because I had a lot of conversations, interview questions, or just reading or watching other interviews or lectures in which people would talk about the reliability of the Bible, and they would often say things like, yes, we grant that it's a geographically accurate manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ancient text that gives us a setting in historical reality as far as the places go, but they still would think that it was mythological overall because the people, the events, those didn't exist, those things didn't happen. And it, this is, I think, a great example to contrast this with is the Iliad by Homer, because
Mm-hmm.
Homer's Iliad is writing about places that existed, like
Mm-hmm.
Troy, like Mycenae, and many other locations in that book.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even some general historical context. So it's the end of the Mycenaean era. There's some destruction of Troy that seems to represent what the book is talking about with the war there. But the people in the book, Priam, Achilles, Agamemnon, Hector, Paris, there's no Helen, there's no archaeological evidence that any of these people existed, not even one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so we look at that book, and yes, it's set in some real locations and some kind of general historical context, but it's still mythology because the stories, they didn't really happen as they are depicted in that poem, and the people weren't real people. But
Mm-hmm.
this is not the case with the Bible, even though a lot of people claim that it is. They think that, oh yeah, Jerusalem existed, Nazareth existed, Bethlehem existed, that's fine. But the people like David, King Hezekiah, even Jesus, according to some people,
Mm-hmm.
they claim they didn't exist, and those events that are recorded in the Bible, they didn't happen. What I could see from the archaeological evidence is that we really have an astonishingly high number of people who are named in the Bible that are attested archaeologically. Most people probably think, yeah, there's probably 10, 20, maybe 30 people, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are 135 people that I address in the book. And there are a few others that I probably could have put in, although they're very speculative. That's why I left a few of them out. And I mean, just for me, even, it was a much higher number than I originally anticipated. I was thinking somewhere maybe in the high 90s, low hundreds, just based on earlier studies and things that I'd read. There's a couple articles by one scholar who has written on this topic before, and he has quite a few figures in the Bible attested archaeologically, but there are a lot more, and I think we will continue to find more as well. And so this is one more piece of the puzzle showing that the people named in the Bible were real people. They held those titles or those positions. They lived at that time in that place, did those things.
Yeah. So you can trust both the geography as well as the people, right? Because one without the other, you don't have a story. You don't have something that we can trust. But if we can trust both of those, that makes a huge difference in our reading of scripture. Um, you were talking a little bit about the people you included, right? The characters, the historical figures you included in the book. Can you elaborate more on the criteria? You said there's maybe additional ones that weren't as reliable, which means 135 we do have are hopefully reliable.
Right. Yeah. And I put a rating system in the book as well so that people could see at least some general guidelines who is considered to be a very, very firm identification versus on the other end of the spectrum who is speculative. But there's essentially five criteria, and there are some other scholars who use these as well. And then there's a sixth criteria that comes into play sometimes if it was found on the antiquities market. So that would be authenticating that it's a real artifact.
Mm-hmm.
But those criteria are that the name matches correctly. And yes, sometimes we have situations where when you transition from one language to another, there are some changes or distortions, but those can be traced and explained. So not nicknames and not like a name that, oh, it sort of looks like maybe it's it. Name needs to match. Second would be family lineage. So oftentimes in the Bible, we read about this person was the son of such and such. So that's one identification there, or a brother, or something like that. And on a fair amount of inscriptions, we have this kind of family data as well. The third thing would be their title, their occupation, their position, maybe some accolade that they're known for. So it could be king, could be priest, could be scribe. We've got many different occupations and titles like this. But that's something else that helps narrow it down even more, especially if it's a position that is very specific, where there are only a few people who held that, like king, for instance. If we have that before the name, we're usually not going to have too much trouble identifying the person. Yes, sometimes there are multiple kings with the same name, but then we can look to other information like the chronological setting. So then the fourth would be the chronological setting. So we're looking for contemporary inscriptions, contemporary with the time that the person lived according to the Bible. So definitely within that century, but even within that generation, if we can hone it down that narrowly. And then finally, it'd be the geographic context. Was the artifact found in the same place where that person lived or worked in the Bible, or does the inscription talk about them in that place or in association with that place? So if we can have all five of those, we have a very firm identification for the person. If we have, say, three, it can still be fairly strong. It depends on which three it is. But when you get less than that, when you get into the area of just two identifications, that is a lot more speculative, unless it's a totally unique name.
Can you quickly recap the five? Just like give the names of each of them so our listeners can write them down if they need to.
Name, family lineage, title or occupation, chronological context, geographical context.
And you can see that on each page of the book by their names right here in this box. The bottom one is an identification rating. That's what you're talking about. And you have different categories for that. What are those categories of trustworthiness of the name being identified in antiquity?
Yep. So I put that as A, B, C, and D. A little bit like you might find in some New Testament textual criticism apparatus. But I found that it's just a simple way for that people are going to understand it. And so we have on one side A, firm, going to B, probable, C, tentative, and then D, speculative. So descriptions plus a rating. And I didn't put too many speculatives in the book. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few other names that I possibly could put into the speculative version, but actually I thought in some cases maybe they're even more speculative. they're on the edge of speculative, and so I just chose not to include them.
These names cover both Old and New Testament personages, obviously. Were the Old Testament harder to identify and confirm as being in existence than the New Testament, or is it a mixed bag?
Yeah, not necessarily, because a lot of the Old Testament identifications are people of high status, like kings, and so those are going to be easier to identify. There's not 100 people with the name David who have the title king. So in that way, it's not as difficult. But for some of the officials that we see on Boule, that's where it becomes a bit more difficult, because we may just have something like their name and their father's name, and then we know approximately the date that the artifact was made and generally where it came from, but
Mhm.
we might not have a title, and it's somebody who's possibly mentioned one time in passing in the Bible. So some of those are the more difficult ones.
Hmm. You're, you're talking about the process of like finding artifacts, like the what do you say, artifact market, or like how does that process work? Are there just artifacts that pop up and you kind of have to figure out, is this actually from somebody real? Is it not? How do you become aware of artifacts? Like, can you explain that process a little bit for those maybe wanting to dig a little deeper?
Yeah, so today we still have problems with looting. Many things, of
Hmm.
course, are found in archaeological excavations, sanctioned projects, but there is some looting that still goes on. In the past, there was probably more, or more at least, that recovered artifacts of significance. And so those would make it into the antiquities market. They were trying to sell them and make some money off of them.
Mm.
And some of those were unknown for many, many years. So they may have been looted a long time ago, and they only became known in more recent history. This could have been because they were kept in a private collection. Maybe the owner didn't really know that it was anything of significance.
Hmm.
But the way that usually will happen is an antiquities dealer has got some artifact maybe in their shop or today online, and a scholar goes in and notices it, and then they decide, okay, this could potentially be very significant, if it's real or if it's what I think it is, and then they might do a study on it. So the James ossuary is a really famous artifact that had a situation like this where it was probably looted in the 70s, but
Hmm.
it wasn't really known to anyone until the early 2000s. And then it was publicly displayed, and there were a lot of studies and debates on it and so forth. So that happens now, and collections move, people sell them. And again, someone might own it for a long time and they don't know exactly what they've got, or they
Hmm.
just don't say anything about it. And then they sell it to someone else or to a museum, perhaps. And then the information gets out there.
But if you
What's
were
the
the one to find it, you could immediately put it up. Like, it'd be much more reliable because you found it, they can certify it, and so it's a lot smoother process that way.
Yeah, yeah. Optimally, you find it in an excavation. And so the exact location and stratigraphic context is known. So we know, it's a real artifact. It's from the Iron Age 2, from Jerusalem, criteria like that. And so there's no question about the authenticity of it. Then it just becomes a focus on, what exactly does that inscription say, and who is it referring to?
Got it.
if you're doing an archaeological dig, which you have done, don't the artifacts that are found automatically belong to the nation in which it's found?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. But let me ask you a couple of personal questions real quickly. Um, why did you want to be an archaeologist? What led you to pursue this field, which is kind of unusual, very small? One of the best schools to prepare for such a career, if somebody's out there listening to us really would like to do that, do you find it fulfilling? What's the most difficult thing about being an archaeologist? And who do you work closely with in this field? Is
Well,
there
I
competitiveness
got
between you
involved.
guys?
What's that?
Is there competitiveness between you guys?
Yeah, so I got involved in archaeology because I was very interested in history,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned about archaeology really in third and fourth grade. Didn't even know it existed before that, and found it fascinating that people would go out to these ancient ruins and dig in the dirt and find completely new material from the ancient past.
Mm-hmm.
And then I continued reading more books on the subject, and I was given some books on archaeology as it relates to the Bible. And I found that fascinating. I had no idea that there were all these discoveries that directly related to the biblical text, some that helped us understand it better, and many that demonstrate its historical authenticity. So I just continued reading and reading, and as the years went by, when I was going to college, I decided, I really enjoy this. I find it interesting, and I think that it's beneficial. So I'm going to try to study this and see what happens. I didn't know if I'd be able to get a job in the field, or
Yeah.
continue on in graduate school, but that was my intent, to study something that I loved and thought was valuable. So that's kind of how I got into it, and just did internships and graduate school, and so eventually was able to make it into a career. As far as the best schools to prepare for this kind of career, it really depends on what you're trying to do, and probably what your priorities are as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say that people need to go get a bachelor's degree in archaeology. In fact, it might suit them better to do something a little bit more general: history, biblical studies, and do try to do some classes in archaeology if they're available, because there really aren't that many undergraduate programs these days. Do a dig, try to do some kind of volunteer work on an excavation, or some sort of internship if you can, and then a master's degree is where you need to specialize more. So Shepherd's Theological Seminary has a master's in biblical archaeology right now, so that's a good option. We do an excavation and lab work, and a number of electives to choose from as well. So that's one option. You could also just go to a secular university and try to study archaeology of the ancient Near East, or maybe Egyptology, Assyriology, something like that. That's always going to come with some worldview difficulties, of course, but you can do those specializations, and then for the PhD, it's going to be similar. I mean, you can choose a secular PhD program, which is, those are out there. There's some availability. There's very, very few Christian universities or seminaries that have a PhD in archaeology or something related to biblical archaeology. There are options, but they're pretty limited. And so some people might do like a biblical studies type of degree with an emphasis in archaeology, or they might do an apologetics program where they emphasize that. But personally, my recommendation would be to do a program that's actually in archaeology, some facet of archaeology, and then if you want to do biblical archaeology, then you apply those skills to this specific field.
Do you need to know the languages, Hebrew and Greek?
No, not necessarily. I think it's very helpful, but it's not absolutely required, especially these days. There are so many different people that have specializations that oftentimes you've got this consortium of scholars on a dig, and each person may have a different type of specialization.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, it wasn't like that. Archaeologists had to be a jack of all trades more
Yeah.
often, and for a small project, that's still the case. But if you can have other people with specializations, then yeah, let them do that. But it doesn't hurt, certainly.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part of your job?
Hardest part is probably getting the permits and organizing the excavations.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Gabe?
And should somebody, if somebody's interested in this field, would you is there room for people to come in? Like, is it an expanding field, growing field, or is it pretty as my grandpa said earlier, competitive, like very not much room to get in, I guess.
Yeah. It's not market driven, so it has the ability to expand, but people are really going to have to make it expand.
Got it.
So yes, there are opportunities for careers in archaeology, but you're going to have to make something happen yourself, probably. You can't just expect to have all these different job openings that are available for that,
Mhm.
and you just send in an application.
Yep.
Funding is difficult to do a dig, isn't it? Getting the money to make it happen.
Yeah, that's another difficulty, definitely. But the money's out there in various places. It's just getting in front of the right people who are interested in those things and finding the right projects. But
I
certainly a challenge.
I did the Seven Churches of Asia trip, and we went to Colossae, and it was just a big mound. There's been no archaeological work done there. It's just covered over.
Yeah, they
So,
just started last fall.
oh, they did.
So
They're
yeah,
starting
they
on it.
started excavating in the necropolis, and I assume that they'll probably start on the actual city this year. We'll see.
Well, let me ask you this: what's your favorite archaeological site that you've worked on or been to? And have you ever just sat out at night when there's no work going on and just looked at the stars and wondered back what was taking place when that was really an active, you know, city?
Hmm. Well, the most historically significant one I've worked on has been Jerusalem, in a few different places. So
Mhm.
I'd probably put that up there at the top of the list. And yeah, absolutely. Just thinking about all the different historical figures that lived there and walked there and were in this building or
Mhm.
helped build this or instructed to build that. Nehemiah rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem or Hezekiah expanding the wall of the city for that new quarter, or David in his palace and Jesus walking the streets of Jerusalem, things like that. So it's really incredible, especially when some of those buildings are uncovered and you can see at least part of what they were seeing and interacting with.
Yeah, sure. We're here with Titus Kennedy on his book Archaeology and the People of the Bible. Make sure to pick it up from Amazon or Harvest House if you get a chance. I guess my question for you is, as you're doing these digs, what are the most common items found that bear the names or likeness of individuals in Scripture? Like, I guess relevant pieces. Like, what do we see there?
Yeah, it depends on the period. So if we're talking about Old Testament, generally it's going to be inscriptions, or it's going to be cuneiform tablets or something of that sort, some kind of cuneiform on clay, and also seals or bullae. For the New Testament, coins are very common.
Mm,
Some inscriptions as well. A lot of ancient manuscripts, though.
got it.
What's a
So,
boule or boulai?
Yeah, so a bulla is the term for a lump of clay that has been impressed with a seal. So they would have these ring seals, and they may write a letter on papyrus or parchment, and they roll it up and they tie a string around it, and then they would put this lump of clay over the tie, and they would
mm,
press their ring into that, and then it left this impression, which had their name on it and often their title, their family lineage, and the remainder of what we generally have is just that impressed lump of clay, the bulla.
huh.
So you have all of these books, understanding the people of the Bible. You have the essential archaeological guide to the Bible. You have unearthing the Bible, and I can't remember the title of the other one. I don't have a hard copy of it.
Excavating the evidence for
That's it,
Jesus.
excavating the evidence. I do have it on Kindle, and I have read it. That doesn't mean I can retain any of it. I did read it. How can these books be used not only by scholars, but by lay people, Bible teachers, students, and congregants? How can they use these books for study? And are they going to personally enrich our lives as well?
Yeah, I think that three of my books could be used as reference works. So if someone is studying in church or Bible study, or they're just in their personal reading and they're going through a particular book of the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
then they could use some of that material to reference. For example, if they're reading the book of Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
and Daniel is in Babylon, so you could go to my book, The Essential Archaeological Guide to Bible Lands, that's all about the different places, and there's a section on Babylon, so that could be helpful. Or maybe they are studying the book of Kings, and they're looking at the time of Hezekiah and Second Kings. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you could you could go to the Jerusalem section in that book, or you could get archaeology and the people of the Bible, and you could read through the entries on Hezekiah and on Sennacherib and on Isaiah and so forth. So that's one way to do it. Of course, you could just read through the books from start to finish. I arranged the two of the books chronologically, and then the locations book that's organized geographically, but each entry is still chronological. So you could just read through it, kind of going from Genesis to Revelation type of idea, to get this overview of biblical archaeology finds. And then for something like excavating the evidence for Jesus, that's of course hyper focused just on Jesus and the Gospels.
Right.
And I mean, you could use that as a reference work, I suppose, but the way that I wrote it is really more to be read just straight through. So it could be a companion study book when you're going through one of the Gospels.
So these books, if you have come across a name in the Bible, instead of just skipping over it or blah, 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 trying to figure out what it says, like most people, they have trouble pronouncing names, you can actually take one of these books and go look it up and read about it, and it becomes more real to you. I remember just a few weeks ago, somebody was teaching on Jonah, and Jonah going to, where'd he go?
Nineveh.
He was leaving. Yeah, he was going to Nineveh, and people didn't understand how far away that actually was. If you just skip over it, you really don't get the physical impact of the distance that would have to be traveled to get to Nineveh. And so these things are very helpful. Maps are helpful. I don't know how people function in studying the Bible without a map in their hand, So this is very helpful to look up names of Bible places and personages in the Bible. It's very helpful. So it's not just for scholars, it's for regular lay people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote those books to be a general audience type of book.
Excellent.
Really, really, especially three of the books. The
Mhm.
Essential Archaeological Guide to Bible Lands is
Mhm.
a little more difficult, I think, for the non-archaeology enthusiast,
Mhm.
but certainly it can be read by someone who doesn't have an advanced degree in archaeology. It's just
Yeah.
you've got to be interested in the topic. But the others, either story driven, like with Jesus and the Gospels, or the other two books, very very short sections, either on an artifact or a person. So some people I've talked to, the way they would approach reading those books is they would just read one entry each day or each night, just a few pages, so it's not a lot to bite off,
Mhm.
and you can process it quite easily. Got pictures there, maps like you mentioned, in the backs of the books there. So hopefully it's very easy reading as long as people have an interest in the topic.
Yep. And this becomes, I mean, nowadays it becomes more and more relevant as culture becomes, especially American culture, um, becomes more postmodern, even moves beyond postmodernism of how can we know anything? Um, and as the culture moves away from the Bible and Christianity, like how helpful it is to include stuff in your sermons of, hey, this is how we know King David lived. This is how we know Jesus walked the earth. I guess stuff becomes helpful. And even in conversation, you're talking with somebody about the gospel and they bring up, how do you know this? Well, you have these books on hand so that you can go and find some evidence. Not that it is going to convince everybody, but it strengthens our faith at least that we're not crazy for believing what we believe. Um, so
Mhm.
I think this book definitely will be helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the most destructive things Bible teachers do is they talk about Bible stories rather than biblical events. These events actually took place. They're not stories that are made up or mythical in any kind of way. So I think the more that you can use the appropriate verbiage to describe it, the more you can show people on maps where it happened. The more you can show people. Am I taking too much of your time here? The more you can show people artifacts on a screen and say, we found this and this proves here's David's name or Solomon's seal here that was found in the palace in Jerusalem is very helpful and encouraging to people. Sorry,
Yeah.
Gabe, you got a question?
Yeah. We already mentioned a bulla, right? What that is. Can you explain a little bit, maybe like a stele, an ossuary, a prism, or a leaf? What are some of these terms that appear in these conversations?
Yeah, sure. So a stele is going to be a monument. It's usually a stone, an inscribed monument, and it'll have text and or pictures on it. So in Egypt, these are all over the place. In Mesopotamia, they are quite common as well. In the Levant, not so much. So the Israelites didn't really make these. They would make monument stones that were markers for locations, but
Mhm.
they generally didn't put anything on them.
Right.
But being something that was usually official and most of the time in stone, these were large, well made, had lots of information on them, and they withstood the ravages of time. So, a lot of stelae from the ancient Near East are a vital source of information for us. Some of the others you asked about, like an ossuary, that's basically a bone box that was used in the Roman period. So we find lots of these related to biblical times from the first century BC and the first century AD. So around the time of Jesus and the apostles. And a lot of these have names on them because not every time, but often enough, they would inscribe the name of the deceased on the ossuary, on this bone box, so that you know who it is. And because of that, we've been able to identify some other biblical characters like Caiaphas, the high priest, for
Mm.
example, or James, the brother of Jesus, or Jesus himself is on that ossuary, but and Simon of Cyrene, even, and quite a few others. So really helpful as well. And those are put in tombs, and so that's one reason why they've been preserved over the last 2,000 years. They weren't just sitting out somewhere for people to reuse or destroy. You
Mm.
asked about prisms. So prisms, we typically are going to find these in an Assyrian context or maybe Mesopotamian in general, but it's a six-sided hexagonal clay prism, and there's cuneiform text on all those sides. So probably the most famous prism in biblical archaeology would be the prisms of Sennacherib, like the Taylor prism,
Mm.
that one in the British Museum, very famous. It's basically the Assyrian version of the invasion of Judah and the siege of Jerusalem when Hezekiah was king.
So
Mm.
it's really, really a good thing we haven't found an ossuary with Jesus's bones in it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Although, of course, there's people who claim they did. There was a whole quote unquote documentary on
Of
that
course.
subject, the Jesus family tomb.
Oh, well, enough with the silliness. What is the difference between a tablet and a foundation tablet? Are they the same thing or is there a difference?
So when we're talking about tablets,
Hmm.
we're usually talking about these square, rectangular clay tablets, although sometimes there are metallic ones as well, or even wood ones in other periods, that
Hmm.
they would use to record transactions or sometimes poems or even stories on. But a foundation tablet or a foundation deposit, it could be in the form of a cylinder or something else. These were put in to a building and it was connected to the dedication of that building. And it was usually a very, very important document that related to history and typically the gods. So these would be placed in a temple. The Cyrus cylinder is an example of this. So that was found as a foundation deposit, and it talks about Cyrus taking Babylon and then sending all these exiled peoples back to their different nations with the religious objects that the Babylonians had stolen from their temples. And so Book of Ezra has this as well, this proclamation by Cyrus that the Jews can return to Jerusalem, they can rebuild the temple, and in any sense those artifacts back with them that had been stolen by the Babylonians. So the foundation ones are just a very specific location, and they're usually historically significant and have some connection to a temple or the religion.
Got it. Difference between tablet and foundation tablet, good stuff. Timing wise, as you look throughout history and as you look throughout the timetable of the Bible and beyond, what are the different time periods you look at when it comes to the archaeological record? You were talking about I think strata earlier, different kind of levels in the dig that you're doing. Can you explain a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so I'm usually dealing with things from the Bronze Age to the Byzantine period, or maybe into the Islamic periods. So we've got Bronze Age, followed by the Iron Age, and
Mhm.
then after that comes the Babylonian period, and then the Persian period, then the Hellenistic period, which would be kind of like the intertestamental times, and then the Roman period with the New Testament goes on a bit after that. And then once Rome, the Roman Empire becomes Christian, that's then when we start calling it the Byzantine period. And
Are there any
then
memorization tools that will help us keep that in mind? Because most you say to somebody, this is from the Bronze Era, they go, what does that mean?
yeah, it's a bit arbitrary. So the Bronze Age is roughly going to be 3200 BC to 1200 BC. It's just a framework that was developed by archaeologists. And initially, the reasoning was that this was the metal that was used. So they
Right.
actually used to call like the Copper Age, and then they call the Canaanite period and so forth. Then it was changed: Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. But really, you just got to memorize those dates and try to associate them with historical periods as well.
So it's just
Yep.
rote memory. You got to
Yeah,
get it in
yeah.
there somehow.
So Bronze Age would be what biblical characters would be from Bronze Age, and do we have anything from there?
So the patriarchs all the way until the midpoint of the Judges period is going to be Bronze Age.
Right.
So yeah, we do have a lot of artifacts from there. We don't have a lot as far as biblical characters being attested by archaeological inscriptions because it's just so long ago, and really we have more material from closer in time. But there's some that we can point to, and then of course the locations and the events as well. We've got those.
Yep.
So you don't have a piece of acacia wood that says boat built by Noah on it? We haven't found that
No,
yet.
not yet.
Uh-huh.
Looking for that. maybe we'll find it.
It's out there on Mount Ararat, I heard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if the wood stays around that long,
Yeah. So how do you know time period wise? Like, how do you know something's from the Bronze Age versus the Iron Age versus all the different ages?
we could probably evaluate that at least three different ways. So one would be based on where you excavate it, the strata that it's found in, so the layer of the archaeological site. And these different layers, they're going to have different types of artifacts in them, depending on their time period. And so if you're for a very, very deep layer, you're, earlier than the other ones that you've excavated. So that's that's one clue, and you may already have information that tells you this strata is from the Middle Bronze Age, for example. So that's one way. The other way is looking at the typology of the artifact itself or the things that surround it. And pottery is the most commonly used for dating things. So we may look at the pottery, and it's this certain type of pottery that fits the late Bronze Age or maybe the Iron Age 1. Okay. And so that points us to its archaeological context. So typology. And then the third, we might do some other type of testing on it, scientific testing, or I guess another evaluation could be if it has an inscription. So the inscription might tell us this is from the time of King such and such, and that would help us. But yeah, in certain periods, radiocarbon dating is very helpful. In other periods, it's not. And in some contexts, pottery is going to be very helpful, and in others, we acknowledge that it's like 100-year period that this specific type of pottery covers. And if we're looking for answers more detailed than that, we can't necessarily get to it. But yeah, strata, typology, the main ones, and then sometimes the scientific testing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but like you can have a city and there's just going to be layers from each time period, right? And as the city goes on, as the next generation or generations come up, it buries the old stuff, buries the old stuff. And so when you're going there to look back at it, you're just digging down through this is 100 years here, 100 years, 300 years, etc.
Yep. Yeah. And if you dig a trench, or a square, and then you're down in the bottom and you look at the wall of it, so to speak, you can see the clearly defined layers. You can see the breaks between them, almost like you were drawing on a piece of paper with a red marker and then a blue marker and then a green marker and so forth. You can see where the breaks between different layers are. And so you can at least assemble a relative chronology there. You may not be able to immediately assign this is Babylonian period, this is Iron Age, this is Bronze Age, but you can at least see different relative periods. And then when we have the information from those different layers, then we can start to assign the dates.
Yep. And correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, you're here, and I have this question, so I want you to confirm it. When we were in Israel, they pointed out in Jericho that you can see the burn layer or a burn layer from possibly where Jericho was razed to the ground when Joshua entered. Is that true? Can you actually see the burn layer in Jericho from when that happened in the
Oh
Bible?
yeah. Yeah, and a lot of other places. But the one at Jericho in some places is about a meter thick. So it's
Wow,
very distinguishable.
that's so cool.
So the closer you get to bedrock, the closer you're getting into the most ancient of civilizations, right? And once you hit that, there's
Yeah,
nowhere else to go.
right, right.
When I was in Israel last time, we went to the temple sifting project.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that kind of thinking and demonstrating of where something is by pottery and other clues is thrown out because it's all mixed up. But I was amazed in the things that we found in our short time there was how quickly the archaeologists could identify what looked like just to me to be a bunch of a lump of something. He was able to say, no, this is what this is. This is a piece of mosaic from the floor. or whatever, or this is a bottle top, you could tell that pretty much. But so it's amazing how quickly you become adaptable in identifying what something is once you experience it more and more. Again, I don't know what that has to do with anything. It's just what I was thinking. I wanted to ask you, what is the most important, notable name in these 130 besides Christ, besides Jesus, in the book that meant the most to you as you studied through it?
Well, I would have picked Jesus, but you
Yeah, of course.
removed that for me. But
We took that out.
one that I use as an example time and time again because of his historical significance, because of his biblical significance, and because of the conditions of scholarship and how it changed things, is David. So David was thought to be a mythical character by
Right.
so many scholars, at least from the 1980s, and then up to 1993 when the Tell Dan Stele was found, and then since then there's been more as well. But it went from David being a mythical character to David obviously being this founding king of the Israelite dynasty, and it actually changed the minds of so many scholars, which doesn't happen a lot. And so it's a pretty incredible story with that find, and obviously immensely important because of David's status historically and theologically.
Yeah.
You've got 4 books. Just want to make people aware of them again, that are all available from Harvest House and from Amazon. The one we're currently looking at is the Archaeology of the People of the Bible. There's Unearthing. I think this was your first book, Unearthing the Bible,
Yep, that's
which
right.
covers places in the Bible or artifacts in the Bible. And then you have this essential look at the Bible concerning archaeological contents. And then you have one about Jesus Christ. I can't remember what was the title of that one?
Excavating the evidence for Jesus.
Excavating the evidence for Jesus. All those are available. We're encouraging everyone to go out and buy those so that they can have a complete library. And when they have a question, they can turn to it. The back of the books have an index where you can look up scripture index, and you can look up the related material, or they're in alphabetical order where you can look up with the personage that you're investigating. Gabe, you want to take the last question for us?
Wait, before we go to the last question,
Okay.
which one's your favorite? Which one? I don't know. Did you enjoy? Yeah, which of the 4? Talking to
So
Titus,
those are like babies. How do you say it? Which is your favorite kid?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think the one that I probably put the most work into is the Essential Archaeological Guide, the Bible Lands. It's certainly the longest and
Yes.
the most complex, but it's also the one that is the least popular because it's longer and it's more difficult to read. But yeah, I put a lot into that one. But as far as what's the most important one, it's the one on Jesus, of course. That's the foundation. So that's what I always tell people if they ask, which of your books would you recommend that I give to somebody if they're really interested in if the Bible is true or not and what archaeology has to say. And I always tell
So
them,
what you're
you got to
saying
start with
is,
the Gospels.
Titus, what you're saying is you're just like any kids I've ever worked with. You ask them a question about the Bible and the answer is Jesus.
Yeah, it's the right answer a lot of the time, isn't it?
That's good. All right. What you have any projects coming up? Any books coming out that you'd like to share with us? Share with the listeners?
Yeah, I'm working on 2 books right now. So one on the Exodus that's going to be hopefully very comprehensive, archaeology, the Exodus. And then I'm working on a sort of a tour book series that I'm co-authoring, and that's not going to be as in depth, but it hopefully will be a helpful guide for tour groups or people who want to go on a tour.
Oh,
And then I've got excavations upcoming, at least hopefully. Things in the Middle East are always changing, but
True.
We're trying to make plans, get back to Zoar, for instance, and we'll see. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Might have to uh, restructure or reschedule things a little bit, but have to remain flexible in archaeology.
Well, we want to congratulate you on the books and this newest book. Anything I can pray specifically for you?
Oh yeah, for upcoming projects, iron out some of those difficulties.
Well, it's been great talking to you again, and we really appreciate you and your ministry. You're an encouragement to all of us. Let us pray together. Father, we thank you for Titus and his ministry through books and through teaching and through archaeological digs and the findings that he's been able to bring to the forefront. We just pray, Lord, that you would use his materials that he's produced to change lives, to change perspectives, to deepen people's understanding of the Bible, to enrich their lives. We pray, Lord, for his future works, that you would enable him to work on them with as much strength as he possibly has, and that he can complete them in order to bless the body of Christ with its teaching. Use him, encourage him, and bless him and his wife. Now we ask this all in the name of our precious Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Book Podcast. If you liked what you heard and want to support us, like, follow, subscribe on any podcasting platform, on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Simply type in @HearTheBookPod, @HearTheBookPod. Thank you. See you next time.